Hello, I'm Mark Billingham and I am a crime writer, the creator of the Tom Thorne series. I'd like to read you an extract from my very first novel, Sleepyhead. Firstly because it's 20 years old this year. I know, 20 years, hence the silver in this scraggly lockdown beard. But also because my 20th novel, Crybaby, which is coming out in July, is a prequel to that debut. So anyway, I hope you enjoy meeting Tom Thorne for the very first time in the first chapter of Sleepyhead. Thorne hated the idea of coppers being hardened. A hardened copper was useless, like hardened paint. He was just resigned to a down and out with a fractured skull and the word scum carved into his chest, to half a dozen girl guides decapitated, courtesy of a drunken bus driver in a low bridge, and the harder stuff. Resigned to watching the eyes of a woman who's lost her son glaze over as she gnaws her bottom lip and reaches absently towards the kettle, Thorne was resigned to all this. "Looks like our killer's fucked up, sir." And he was resigned to Alison Willits. He was resigned to having to think of this small, girl-shaped thing enmeshed in half a mile of medical spaghetti as a breakthrough, a piece of good fortune, a stroke of luck. And she was barely even there. Thorne stared down at Alison Willits. Her fringe needed cutting. He watched as her eyeballs rolled up into their sockets. Did she know they were there? Could she hear them? And could she remember? 3 murders that they knew about, each victim suffering death due to the constriction of the basilar artery. Basically, some maniac was targeting women in their homes, pumping them full of drugs, and giving them strokes. Giving them strokes. Hendricks was one of the more hands-on pathologists, but a week earlier in his laboratory, Thorne had been less than thrilled at having those clammy hands on his head and neck in an effort to demonstrate the killing technique. "What the bloody hell do you think you're doing, Phil?" "Shut your face, Tom. You're off your face on tranquilizers. I can do anything I like. I just bend your head this way and apply pressure to this point here to kink the artery. It's a delicate procedure, this. Takes specialized knowledge. I don't know, army, martial arts maybe. Either way, he's a clever bastard. No marks to speak of. It's virtually undetectable." Now, Thorne stood listening to the persistent wheeze of Alison's ventilator. Locked-in syndrome, it was called. They didn't know for sure, but she could probably hear, see, and feel. Alison was almost certainly aware of everything going on around her, and she was completely and utterly unable to move. Not the tiniest muscle. Syndrome wasn't the right word. It was a sentence. And what about the individual who'd passed it? A martial arts nutcase, special services? That was their best guess. Their only guess. None the wiser. 15 minutes later, as Thorne neared the exit, the muttered curses and dripping bodies coming through the main doors towards him told him summer was at an end. He stood beneath the hospital's elaborate red brick portico and squinted through the downpour towards where the car was parked, tight against the railings that ran around Queen's Square. Thorne turned up his collar and prepared to make a dash for it. At first, he thought it was a parking ticket, and he pulled it roughly from beneath the wiper blade. As soon as he removed the single sheet of A4 from the polythene wrapper and unfolded it, he knew it was something else. He carefully inserted it back into its protective wrapping, wiped off the rain and peered at the neatly typed message. After the first 4 words, he was no longer aware of the rainwater running down the back of his neck. "Dear Detective Inspector Thorne, what can I say? Practice makes perfect. And don't you just envy her that perfect distance? I invite you to consider the concept of freedom, true freedom. Have you ever really considered it? I'm sorry about the others, truly. I shall not insult your intelligence with platitudes about ends and means, but offer in mitigation the thought that a massive undertaking often has an appropriate margin of error. It's all about pressure, Detective Inspector Thorne, but then you'd know all about that. Seriously though, Tom, maybe I'll call you sometime." Thorne looked around, his heart thumping. Whoever left the note must be close. The car hadn't been there long. All he could see were grim-set, rain-soaked faces and beetling umbrellas, and DC Dave Holland dodging the puddles as he loped across the road towards him. "Sir, the boyfriend's just arrived. You must have passed him on your way out." The look on Thorne's face stopped him dead in his tracks. Alison is not a fuck-up, Holland. Well, of course not, sir. All I meant was... Listen. This is what he wants. He pointed back towards the hospital. Do you understand? His shirt was plastered to his back, rain and sweat. He could barely understand it himself. He could hardly believe what was struggling to come out of his mouth. Words which, even as they formed on his lips, told him that he should never have agreed to become part of this. Alison Willits is not his first mistake. She's the first one he's got right. Thank you very much for listening, and stay safe.